Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is To Lead is to Learn. In this new podcast, we're going to be exploring leadership theories and practices. In the second part of our mini-series on motivation, we are going to progress through the 1960s and three of the key pieces of research into motivators carried out during this period. We will finish this podcast in 1971 with a key piece of research carried out by Edward Deci into intrinsic motivation and the impact of external factors on this. As we have seen in our first episode, if you've not yet listened to this, please make sure to go back and listen to it first. There appears to be a hierarchy of motivating factors, which set the groundwork for higher level motivational factors. These lower level or hygiene factors may or may not be directly linked to a foundation, which when in place can lead to the development of intrinsic motivation. This intrinsic motivation, proposed by Professor Harry F. Harlow, is what leads us to be creative and enjoy the act of problem solving. It is a source of motivation which provides enjoyment from the act of carrying out a task which seemingly has no external reward attached to it. Within the workplace, this intrinsic motivation is the dream, the pinnacle. But where exactly does it come from? And how can we harness it within the workplace in order to be A, more productive, and B, provide more enjoyment in work? These are questions which still need answering today. However, clues can be found within some of the work carried out. We saw this within the work of Douglas McGregor, where the approach to leadership and the environment within which we work may be key. The continued work within motivational theory may help reveal more of the clues to becoming the motivational leader. In 1961, David McClelland identified that there are three motivating drivers, which we all have. These motivating drivers arose by looking to categorize the long list of motives and needs which Henry Murray developed through his studies into personality. The categories appeared as drivers which are independent of age or gender. Instead, they are all present, but we have different levels of each. This leads to there being a dominating driver which influences our behavior. This is closely linked to learning theory, as McClelland believed that these needs are learned or acquired by the experiences people have through their environment and cultural experiences. Therefore, the dominant driver which a person has will depend on their life experiences and can therefore change over time as they experience more situations. The three drivers, or motivators, under McClelland's theory are achievement, affiliation, and power. Achievement is an inherent need to be successful and feel accomplished, to meet a set standard which is either set by others or arises as an internal standard. This is a primal need to demonstrate a level of competence. For individuals where this is the dominating driver, it is suggested that these individuals prefer to complete tasks which provide a level of personal responsibility and produce results based on their own individual efforts. With the desire for achievement, individuals who are dominated by this driver are motivated by quick acknowledgement of their progress, as this reinforces the desire to be seen as competent. It's been shown that individuals with this as their dominant driver, they perform better at given tasks than those with a low achievement drive. McClelland identified that there were 3 characteristics of high need achievers. The first is that they have a strong desire to assume personal responsibility for performing a task or finding a solution to a problem. The second, they tend to set moderately difficult goals in order to achieve these, and they take calculated risks in order to ensure that they are likely to achieve them. And the third, they have a strong desire for performance feedback. They want to know that they are in fact achieving and are being recognized as doing so. Affiliation is a need for acceptance, a desire for love, belonging, and feeling socially accepted. There is a desire to build and maintain strong relationships with others. This is again a primal need shared by all, but for individuals where this is the dominant driver, they are motivated by being liked and accepted by others. They prefer group tasks, social gatherings, and being seen as part of the team. They are motivated by their efforts, contributing to the wider group's efforts. They will also often be uncomfortable with conflict and will instead put the group's needs above their own. The 3 characteristics identified for individuals with high need for affiliation are, firstly, they have a strong desire for acceptance and approval from others. Secondly, they tend to conform to the wishes of those people whose friendship and companionship they value. And thirdly, they value the feelings of others and use this to influence their behavior. Power, however, is a need for control, be this over their own work or others. This can be seen as 2 types of power, that of independence and that of control. This is a need which we all have, but to different extents and with a different distribution between these 2 types of power. Individuals who are driven primarily by power have a desire to make an impact on others, change their behaviors, and make a difference in life. They seek out situations where they exercise control and or influence over others or events. They aspire for progression and positions which hold status and authority. They tend to be more concerned about the level of influence they hold than being effective with their performance at work. The 3 characteristics identified of individuals with high need of power are, firstly, they have a desire to influence and direct somebody else. Secondly, they have a desire to exercise control over others. And thirdly, they are concerned with maintaining leader-follower relations. If we consider, at this point, 3 of the motivation theories, those of Maslow, Herzberg, and McClelland, in Maslow's theory, he established a hierarchy of needs, with low-level needs focused around physiological, safety, and security. These have parallels within Herzberg's 2-factor theory, where these lower-level needs match up with the hygiene factors, which he put forward. Within McClelland's theory, this encompasses the need for affiliation. However, there is no parallel with physiological needs within Maslow and Herzberg. From Maslow to Herzberg and then to McClelland, there is less and less of these lower-level physiological needs. The higher-level needs of Maslow, socialization, esteem, self-actualization, find parallels within Herzberg's theory with the motivational factors of recognition, achievement, responsibility, and growth. These again map over to McClelland's theory with power and achievement. These higher level needs are being found to be consistent across multiple theories into the drivers within individuals. These also appear within McGregor's theory, with the theory Y model of leadership, where we find higher motivated individuals. Leaders therefore need to take note of the concepts which arise as consistent motivators within these models. These are primarily trust, empowerment, responsibility, achievement, recognition, and growth. With these 6 factors appearing to be consistent across the research, an organization and its leaders should look to put in place practices which regularly feed into these motivators. In 1964, Victor Vroom outlined his expectancy theory of motivation. Within this theory, he suggests that an individual's motivation is affected by their expectations about the future. This future focus, which is suggested, postulates that an individual's motivation is affected by 3 key concepts: expectancy, instrumentality, and valence. The question is, what are each of these? Expectancy is the belief that increasing one's effort will lead to increasing one's performance. In other words, under this model, individuals hold the belief, if I work harder, then I will be better. This is therefore affected by things such as having the appropriate resources available. For example, having the raw materials and the time. It also is affected by having the appropriate skills to do the job, or having the required support to get the job done. In other words, supervisor support, having the correct information to carry out the required task. Instrumentality is the belief that if you perform well, then the outcome will be a valuable one for the individual. In other words, under this model, individuals hold the belief, if I do a good job, then there's something in it for me. This is affected by things such as having a clear understanding of the relationship between performance and outcomes. Another way of considering this is an individual knowing the rules of the reward game. It's also affected by the trust in the people who will make the decision on who gets what outcome, and having transparency in the process that's used to decide who gets what outcome. Valence is a measure of how much importance the individual places upon the expected outcome. For example, if someone is motivated by money, they might not value offers of additional time off. Within this model, there are 3 measures which are important. These are effort, performance, and outcome. This is because these are clearly defined measures which we as individuals can consider. The first assessment that we'll make is that of the probability that our efforts that we put in will lead to the required performance level. If this balance is not clearly weighed in our favour, for example, our efforts are hugely outweighing our performance, then our motivation to put in the effort will suffer. The second assessment we will make is the probability that a successful performance will lead to a certain outcome. If this is not clearly weighed in our favour again, our motivation once again to perform at our best suffers. This model is a cognitive theory of motivation. It's a conscious thought process. Under this model, individuals' motivation is driven by their belief that their efforts will result in a higher level of performance, and then a greater level of achievement in terms of an outcome or a reward. This can be summarized with the equation that an individual's motivation is equal to their valence and their instrumentality and their expectancy. Under the model, if any of the three areas, expectancy, instrumentality, or valence, has a close to zero measure within an individual, then the level of motivation will also be zero, almost regardless of the level of the other two. This model does suffer from an almost hedonistic grounding, whereby the individual will choose the course of action which leads to the greatest level of pleasure or even the smallest degree of pain. This assumes, as well, that the individual is rational and calculative within their thinking all the time, assuming that a person rationally weighs up the outcome and the process to get there at all times. There may, in fact, be individual as well as situational differences, where some people value the process more than the outcome at certain times. So this model has flaws. However, it does help us to consider why large elements of the workforce, including within our teams, will exert low levels of effort with certain tasks, and why, when given other tasks, they may be more inclined to put in a higher level of effort. So as leaders, this model of motivation can easily be used. Are we expecting highly skilled workers to carry out mundane tasks where their maximum effort is not required? Do members of our team value the work they're doing in terms of the desire to achieve the best outcome? How can we increase their valuation of the outcome, potentially by having more ownership of the outcome? In 1968, Lyman Porter and Edward Lawlor developed their own theory of expectancy by building on Victor Vroom's expectancy theory. They, however, took a departure from the traditional rational analysis between satisfaction and performance when building their model of motivation. Their model instead proposes a multi-layered approach to explaining what they saw as a more complex relationship between satisfaction and performance. The main difference which exists within this model, therefore, is that effort or motivation does not lead directly to an individual's level of performance. Instead, the link between effort and performance is mediated by the abilities and traits they hold, as well as the individual's perceptions of their role. Ultimately, in this model, an individual's performance does lead to satisfaction through a multi-dimensional pathway of rewards. So what are the main elements considered within this model? The first element to consider is effort. This refers to the amount of energy an individual has to exert on a given task. However, under this model, there are two considerations which come into play to determine how much effort someone will put into a task. The first is the value of the reward. This is the amount of value which the individual themselves places on the potential reward of doing the task. The second is the perception of the effort-reward probability. This is the individual's belief of the balance of the effort-reward relationship, the ratio they perceive to be between the level of effort they put in and the reward they will get out. For example, if they were to double their effort, would this lead to a significant increase in the reward? Do they deem that this increase in reward to be worth the increase in effort? The second element comes as the individual's performance. Ultimately, within this model, one's effort will lead to their performance. The level of performance is determined by the amount of labour alongside two further measures: the ability of the individual within the task and their perception of the role in which they play within the task. For example, an employee may put in high levels of effort. However, if their ability within the task is low, or they consider their role within the task to be lower than it actually is, then regardless of their effort levels, they will perform poorly. The third and final element is satisfaction. As we have said, there is a multi-dimensional pathway between performance and satisfaction. But within this model, performance still results in satisfaction. They have broken this link down, and they propose that the level of satisfaction an individual will experience is linked to the amount of rewards one achieves. They propose that if the amount of rewards received by the individual meets or goes beyond the level which the individual perceives to be reasonable, then they will feel satisfied with the level of effort they put in and will be motivated to do so again. However, on the flip side, if the reward falls short of what they deem acceptable, they are dissatisfied and they will be less motivated to put the same amount of effort in next time. The rewards which they proposed comes in two kinds: intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. Examples of intrinsic rewards are a sense of accomplishment and self-actualization, while extrinsic rewards may include the working conditions, pay, and status. A fair degree of research points towards intrinsic rewards being much more powerful in terms of future motivation, as they are much more likely to produce attitudes of satisfaction related to one's performance within the given task, and therefore reinforces one's self-worth. This model is much more complex than Vroom's model. However, what has become clear is that there is no simple cause-effect relationship when it comes to motivation. This theory does point to the reward system that organizations are using. How are we using rewards? Are we being clear when it comes to the level of physical extrinsic rewards? Are extrinsic rewards, such as pay, necessary? Or should we be looking at systems whereby we reinforce the intrinsic rewards of our employees' experience? Are we making sure our employees are adequately upskilled and are clear in terms of their roles within tasks? Are we setting our employees up to succeed or fail? And again, how does this impact on their motivation? In 1971, Edward Deci carried out two experiments to reaffirm ideas first seen within the experiments of Professor Harry F. Harlow in 1949. The experiments tested two key hypotheses in order to uncover some insights into the nature of intrinsic motivation. The first hypothesis he tested was that receiving external rewards in the form of money for performing an activity which initially started through intrinsic motivation would result in a decrease in intrinsic motivation to continue performing that activity. The second hypothesis he tested was that receiving external rewards in the form of verbal reinforcement and positive feedback would result in an increase in intrinsic motivation to continue performing that activity. The experiments he carried out took the following form. 2 groups were tasked with performing an activity which had no apparent external reward. This was then followed by a second period where one group received some form of external reward, be it money or verbal reinforcement, while the second group, the control group, did not. There was then a third period where the external reward was halted and both groups were again tasked with completing the activity. The measurements of intrinsic motivation were made by measuring the time spent practicing the activity during a period of free time which was built within the experiment. What was found interesting when completing the second period compared to the first was the group which had experienced external rewards in the form of money saw an increase in intrinsic motivation to practice the task in their own time, while the control group saw little to no change in their motivation. However, when they removed the external rewards in the third period, what they found was quite stark. That the removal of extrinsic rewards actually led to a significant decrease in the intrinsic motivation, not only when compared to the period when external rewards were given, but also when compared to the first period. This was also surprising when compared with the control group, where there was actually a slight increase in the intrinsic motivation rather than any form of decrease. The experiment was repeated. However, this time, the external rewards was verbal feedback. The subject groups, both the experimental and the control groups, were more technically adept within this particular experiment. The results here were quite surprising, as the control group across all 3 periods showed a decrease in intrinsic motivation when completing the task, which hinted at boredom towards the task, which could be considered mundane for their particular skill set. However, the experimental group saw a slight increase as a result of the verbal feedback given within the second period. What was more profound came in the third period, where the control group had seen their intrinsic motivation drop significantly, they spending only a quarter of the time compared to the first period. During this period, the group who had experienced the positive verbal feedback saw a return to their previous levels of intrinsic motivation. What this model appears to show, what this experiment appears to show, has significant ramifications in the world of work. This is something which has to be considered in the long run as we look towards utilizing what we know about motivation and allowing our teams to perform at their best. The findings of Deci appears to show that when the task is challenging and interesting, as in the first experiment, the challenge of the task itself is able to sustain a person's intrinsic motivation. However, when we compare this to the second experiment, where the task was more mundane for the skill set of the individuals, when they no longer find the task challenging, intrinsic motivation appears to wane quite quickly. However, both groups appear to show external rewards can have a significant impact on the motivation of an individual. Monetary rewards is able to gain a significant uptake in motivation in the short term. However, this has an impact on intrinsic motivation in the long term, diminishing the intrinsic motivation to the task, even where the task is challenging and interesting. When the external reward is in the form of positive verbal feedback, however, there is not only an increase in the motivation of an individual towards the task, even when it's considered mundane to the individual, but also helps to increase the intrinsic motivation of the individual towards the task itself. What can we learn from this when it comes to our teams? This appears to support what we have found from Porter and Lawlor's model. Short-term increases in productivity, particularly for mundane tasks, can be achieved through monetary rewards. However, in the long term, external rewards, such as verbal feedback, help to sustain and even increase motivation, even intrinsic motivation, towards a task. This can help our teams when it comes to how they experience their work, their self-esteem, and their self-image. Positive verbal feedback can in fact help individuals' self-image as they reflect on the discrepancy between their real self and their ideal self. Positive verbal feedback, when given appropriately, helps individuals grow. This helps them to achieve self-actualization. Are we making the best use of verbal feedback? Are we providing enough positive verbal feedback? Is the positive verbal feedback we are giving deserved and true? Are we helping our employees grow as an individual? Are we giving too much negative feedback, which is diminishing their sense of self-worth and demotivating our teams? Are we relying too much on financial rewards as a motivator in the search for short-term gain over long-term growth and sustainability? Are we doing the best for our employees and our organization? Again, I'm going to leave you with 3 final questions. The first question: considering the work of McClelland, as a leader, do we bestow enough trust, responsibility, and empowerment on our teams? Do we provide them with enough opportunities to feel achievement, to gain recognition, and ultimately experience growth? If not, what can we do as a leader to work with these highly ingrained motivators to get the best out of our employees and ultimately for our organization? The second question considers the work of Vroom. As a leader, are we aware of the demands which we are putting on our teams? Are we utilizing their skills, or are we asking highly skilled employees to regularly carry out mundane tasks with little or no intrinsic reward attached? Are we expecting individuals to be motivated to carry out the work when there is little personal, individual reward associated with it? As a leader, how can we go about ensuring our employees are provided with tasks which have a level of individual reward attached? Our third and final question considers the work of Porter and Lawlor alongside Deci. As a leader, how are we utilizing reward to sustain or even develop motivation towards tasks? To what extent do our employees find the tasks that they are set interesting and challenging? Is the task short or long term? Is the task suited towards financial incentives, short term and finite? Or is the task best suited towards verbal feedback, long term and creative, looking for both individual and organizational growth? As a leader, how can we make the best use of rewards to increase the motivation of our employees towards the best outcomes for both our employees themselves, and our organisation as a whole. And until next time, remember, to lead requires us to continuously